All right, you can be seated there. Let me just say before we get going, although we already are going, I don't mean that. We've been going for 20 minutes. For some of you, only 5. But for some of us, 20 minutes, okay? Just want you to know that. You know, some of you knew that because we try to keep you all alert to what's going on. And with our new facility that we've been working on, we signed the lease last week, which is unbelievable. Then our next hurdle was dealing with the city. And that's another, horse of a different color. And we had a meeting with them Wednesday, and there were quite a few obstacles that they threw up to us. And so we're working through those obstacles, and we'll see how things go. We're very positive that it's going to be fine. It may take a little bit more time than we thought. But I want you to keep praying about this. That's why you got that cup last week that said pray. Don't think we're done. We are just kind of moved the first couple feet in a pretty long race. And so we want you to keep that cup on your desk, keep it in your kitchen, and you be praying about things again and again and again. We're going to be doing more with the city this coming week. Don't have a meeting planned, at least at the time of the meeting. We have some things set up. We don't know when they're going to happen to be able to move forward in this. So please keep praying on this. Something else that we've mentioned is that there is a card. There's a box that when you go out here or when you come in, that's always there. And it says right here, come win with us. It's time for great ideas. We want ideas on several things. One is ideas on this new facility. This new facility, some of you may have just dreamed about something. Now be careful, your dreams just might come true, and you may be a part of making them come true. So be careful how much you say. But, I'd like to have this. Good, can you help us with that? But seriously, we want your ideas. And do me a favor, some of you have done this, some of you have not. Put your name on it, because sometimes I'm not 100% sure what it means, and we'd like to parse it out a little bit more and find out what you're thinking, so we may be able to engage in some of those kind of things. So please do that. Secondly, would you do this week only, or actually the next couple weeks, on any of these cards that the cards are sitting on the table as you walk out, so they're not in your bulletin or anything. If you know somebody in the city, now I'm not talking about your third cousin, knowing the third cousin removed from somebody who's a city commissioner. That won't help. But I mean, if the city commissioner, somebody in the city is your best friend, let us know, because that could be very, very helpful. We're trying to pull in every connection we can have at this point. We don't want you doing this, because they'll just get barraged and they'll go, I'm done with this. But just let us know, hey, I got this person, and I think he'd be great to talk to, because he's right there. He sits on the city council, and he would be absolutely wonderful. And so put that information on this card as well, and drop it in the back on your way out in that little box. And finally, let me mention this. Can't wait for Crossings United next week, but I almost thought as we were doing this, we thought, you're thinking you're going to go into a nice finished facility. Let me tell you what you're going into. You're going into an old Kmart that has 4 walls and a ceiling. It sounds like you're living inside of a tin can. Hello, 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 hello. There's no chairs. Bring your own chair or sit on the floor. That's your choice. But we will not be providing any chairs for you. So bring your own chair. This is going to be a very stripped down kind of environment, because this isn't. We haven't even started work. Haven't done anything on it. We just want you to see the way it was, the way it is, so that when it is what it becomes, you can say, I was there when. All right. So be a part of the I was there when people, and show up next week. All right. Now I want to get going this morning, because we're in this series called Defining Moments, and the truth is that we all have moments in our life. We all have this, where we've made decisions that have changed the course of our life. We can think of some of them right now. Some of you are going, I made a decision. A major defining moment in my life was back in 1973, a long time ago, for some of you were born. And my whole life changed with 2 little words, 3 letters. I do. Changed the course of my life forever. Okay? Let me show you the scar. No, that's not true. Changed the course of my life forever. You like this shirt? Anybody like this shirt? Yeah. Thank you. My wife bought it. So because I'm married, I'm wearing this. Okay? So it's changed the course of my life forever. We all know those kind of things. Okay, I made another major decision 1 year later when I decided to leave my career that was in the arts in Los Angeles and move to Houston to join with some Christ followers there who were really serious about life change in the community. That changed my life forever. Then in 1989, I made a very, very defining choice to leave ministry in Washington, D.C. in order to come down here to Florida and help my ailing parents and care for them. They both passed since. And that was huge, because that changed so many things about my life. And then in the process of that, I started a company in order to help support them and help support my family. And then in 2008, I chose to sell that company. Very huge defining moment. That was which was my primary means of support and give my full time and attention here to the crossings. Each of these things were very defining moments in my life. They're very kind of line in the sand things. And the reason we call them line in the sand is because all your choices after that, like dominoes, are affected by that very big decision. And in our current series that we're simply calling Defining Moments, it's all about these kinds of decisions. And because each of us, and I've said this before, and I want you to think about this, each of us is just one decision away from a totally different kind of life. Let me say that again. It's not like, oh, no. One decision starts those dominoes going. Each of us are one decision away from something that could totally change the course of our life. And what we've been doing is looking at people in the Bible who face these kind of defining moments, and they're recorded in Scripture for us to learn from them how these kind of choices affected their lives so we can make sure either to do or not do what they did. And this morning we're going to look at one that I think actually is going to be very close to home for some of us because it deals with a struggle that I know for sure every single one of us struggle with. Okay, now when Jesus was at the age of 30, after going through a relatively very unusual birth, but in the next 30 years, he lived in pretty much in obscurity. At 30 years old, he went very, very public as he started to move around Israel and engaging with people in all kinds of different environments and all kinds of different cities. Some of these were very huge, kind of outdoor town hall meeting kind of environments where there were thousands of people. Other of them were kind of medium-sized. Other of them were small, just sitting across a table. He was engaging with people. And his healing, healing people from depression from leprosy, people who couldn't walk, who were crippled so they could walk again, raising people from the dead. As you can imagine, these kind of things were huge attention getters. So it became the buzz all around us. People talked about, hey, did you hear about this guy who did this. That, all his healing, mixed with his revolutionary teaching on things like forgiveness and things like mercy, things like human relationships, things about how to connect the reality of God to life, it just kind of elevated him to almost rock star status. So when you got word that he was coming to your town, he was going to be anywhere close, you wanted to make sure and kind of adjust your schedule so you could be there, so you could see him. And so large crowds would gather just to try to get a glimpse of this person who might be walking on their streets. Now, this is the backdrop for what we want to look at today. Because one day Jesus comes to Jericho, which is this very dry, dusty city that sits in the plains of Israel, 800 feet below sea level, about 17 miles northeast of the city of Jerusalem. And I want to pick it up. Start reading our story there. The whole thing takes place in this city of Jericho. Excuse me. Let's start in the very first verse of Luke chapter 19. Now Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. And there was a man called by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was and was unable because of the crowd, for he was small in stature. Okay? Zacchaeus was like a lot of other people. He had heard this buzz all about Jesus, and so when he hears that he's coming to town, he wants to at least get a look at him. He wants to at least to be able to see him. Now, Luke doesn't give us a whole lot of information about Zacchaeus, just that he's there. But he does include one very important piece of information that is critical to understanding the defining moment he's going to be facing very soon. And it comes out of verse 2. He was a chief tax collector, and he was rich. Why is that in there? Out of all the things that could have been said about Zacchaeus, the only thing Luke decides to tell us in his biography here of Jesus is that Zacchaeus is a tax collector and he's rich. Does Jesus have something against taxes? Or has he got something against people that are rich? People that have money? Let's talk about this for a minute because it's really significant in trying to figure this out. Now, at this particular time, Israel, as a nation, was not their own nation. They were under the power of Rome. They were part of the Roman Empire. And as such, they were required to pay taxes to Rome. That was fine. Pay taxes every place because tax gives you a police department, tax gives you all kinds of protection. Taxes are for a purpose if they're done right. So I don't think taxes in themselves are wrong, okay? But the tax system that was going on there in Israel was very cruel. It was very relentless. It was amounting to nothing short of actually being legalized extortion. Everywhere you turned, there was some kind of a tax. Of course, there was the customary poll tax, or what we would think of as an income tax. There was property or ground tax. But there were also very heavy taxes on every single thing that was imported or exported. Anything that got bought or sold, anything that got grown or produced. There were taxes on roads and taxes to use bridges and taxes on axles and wheels and pack animals and pedestrians. And you had to pay taxes to get admitted into a marketplace. They were just every place. To cross a river, you had to pay a tax. The list just goes on and on. That was bad enough, but the real rub was not just the taxes. It was how these taxes were collected and who the people were that did the collecting. The method of Rome was to use nationals. In this case, it would be Jewish people, because it was in the nation of Israel, to collect from their own people. And this system was filled with graft and all kind of under the table, behind the scenes dealings, because the tax collectors would charge beyond what Rome charged, and then they would pocket the extra. This is how they lined their pockets. If Rome said you could have X, they would charge X plus Y. The people wouldn't know it because they would report it to Rome, and so they had to pay this extra stuff, and the extra stuff went to the tax collector. So you can imagine that these people were not exactly well-liked. In fact, they were not just well-liked, they were viewed as traitors and as extortionists and as scoundrels driven by greed, always on the take. And as a result, they were very rich. And Zacchaeus was one of the best. He's one of the best. He'd risen through the ranks to the position of being the chief tax collector, which meant he probably was the commissioner of taxes in Jericho. So he not only had it coming from the people, he had it coming from the other collectors, that were working under him. Meant he had his hand in every cookie jar that there was to get anything out of. And while we don't know anything really about his childhood, we don't know if he had a lot when he grew up, we don't know if he had a little when he grew up, we don't know what happened, but we know that somewhere along the line, money became really, really, really important to him. Greed became the driving force of his life, and it shaped his decisions, and he was willing to do anything he could to get money. But the interesting thing is, he still wants to see Jesus. He wants to see Jesus, the Jesus he's heard about. So let's read verse 4, what he does. We read he was short of stature. Verse 4 says, "So he ran on ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree in order to see him, for he was about to pass through that way." It's super crowded. He's kind of a short guy. He really wants to be able to see. Doesn't tell us he's a dwarf or anything. But just kind of a short guy, okay? And he can't see over everybody's heads. So he decides, I got an idea, and this will also kind of keep me out of sight of the people because I don't really want to be too close to the people. And so he runs ahead of the crowd, climbs up in a tree where he's not seen real well, and that's where he sits. Now we go to verse 5. When Jesus came to the place, this tree, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for today I must stay at your house." I mean, go figure. Of all the people in this crowd, Jesus stops right at this particular tree. He looks up and he invites himself over for lunch at Zacchaeus' house. I mean, you got to love Jesus, He went ahead and took the risk. What you got going for lunch? Hey, I'll set a place for me at the table. Now, I don't think in his wildest imagination, Zacchaeus thought for a nanosecond that this is how his day was going to go. I think it was just going to be a very short little deal where he saw Jesus and he went on picking other people's pockets. He was probably in hiding and probably didn't really want to get too close to Jesus. He didn't want to get found. And it must have been really uncomfortable in that moment when he knows who he is, and he knows who Jesus is, and he knows there's a pretty big gap between them, and now Jesus is coming over to his house for lunch. Verse 6, it says, "And he hurried and came down and received him gladly." He hurried and came down and receives him glad. This little greedy taker is happy about this, receives him into the home, and this is huge when I read this, because to me it says there's something churning inside him. That with all the acquisition that he has, with all the stuff that he possesses, he still feels like there's something gone. There's something not right here. There's something missing. He's been on this greedy pursuit path of more and more and more stuff, yet he still feels like he's missing out on something. With all the getting and the requiring, something still just isn't right. And as I've wondered about this, and I don't know, and I think, by the way, you have freedom to do this, just don't teach it as theology, but I think you can kind of imagine what happened. Jesus was very popular. His very first sermon was the Sermon on the Mount, which is, you can read it in 3 chapters in the book of Matthew. One of his most well-known sermons. And I just wondered if Zacchaeus maybe either was there, or maybe he heard people talking about this sermon, and those things kind of went through his mind. Maybe one like this, where Jesus said, "Is not life more than food and the body than clothing?" Isn't life more than food and the body than clothing? Maybe he'd been thinking about this one. Maybe this was kind of keeping him awake at night because he knows that's what he's spending his whole life doing. It's just about stuff he can get, for the physical realm of his life. But now he finds himself in the presence of Jesus. And they're sitting around the table and having lunch. And although we don't know what the conversation engages with, just knowing a little bit about Jesus, I got a feeling it wasn't just about, how the soccer game is going to go today. I don't think it was like the Magic game last night. He maybe threw a little bit of that in. But I think there was probably some more substantive stuff going on in their conversation. But Zacchaeus has a very, very, very defining moment. Something happens to him in that lunch. During that lunch, we do not know what the conversation was leading up to it. But Jesus says something in the last 2 verses, only 10 verses about Zacchaeus, in the last 2 verses of this that alert us to this. Verse 9 and verse 10. And Jesus said, "Truly, salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man has come to seek and to save that which was lost." Jesus says salvation has come to this house. A lost person has been found. This is absolutely huge. Something happened very deep in the soul of Zacchaeus as a result of his engagement with Jesus, to where Jesus could say this. Now, I ask myself, how do we know that salvation really has come to his house? How could Jesus speak so absolutely conclusively? Was it that Zacchaeus prayed some kind of prayer? Maybe as some people know it, the sinner's prayer? Maybe he prayed a sinner's prayer. And so Jesus said, "Yeah, man, salvation has come to this house." Or maybe he promised Jesus he'd start reading the Bible, but at that time it was only the Old Testament. So maybe he just promised he'd start reading some of the Old Testament and working on that a little bit. Maybe he decided he'd start going to synagogue. He's been kind of, sloughing off a little bit. He'd start doing that. Or maybe he'd be a part of a small group. And is that the reason Jesus could say salvation has come to this house? How could Jesus say with such certainty that true inner life change had taken place? What did he see? What was the evidence that was so convincing? Now, I'm setting up this because I want you to hear this, and I need to hear this, and I've been hearing this for months and weeks and years. Please don't miss what I'm about to say. I'm going to want to read verse 8. Can you take it up just a second? Verse 8 is what tells us how Jesus knew so convincingly that salvation and life change had happened to this person. This is it. Verse 8. Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, "Behold, Lord, half of my possessions I will give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'll give back 4 times as much." Just let that resonate in you for a second. All the information that Jesus had to know true life change had happened. Here's the key. The taker becomes the giver. The taker becomes the giver. And then let me add this. Being a giver is the greatest evidence that the reality of God had invaded his life. You need to look at that. Being a giver is the greatest evidence that the reality of God had invaded his life. All right, now I want you to track with me for a minute here, because I know that's a big statement. Once when Jesus was asked, What was the greatest commandment? You remember this? He was asked it several times. And Jesus basically said, oh, that's easy. You just love the Lord your God with all your heart. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And then just love your neighbor as yourself. That wraps it up. Sermon's done. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. Everything written in the Old Testament law, that was the question. Can you wrap it all up for us? Give us a summary statement here. So Jesus gave this summary statement. He said that includes all of it. Just keep these two things. But here's the deal. And listen to me close on this one. This isn't natural because it is not how we come out of the egg. It's not even close. Our natural bent from the get-go is all about loving ourselves. We know this. I don't want to need to spend any time on this. Just track how you spend your money, track how you spend your time, track how you spend a lot of stuff. It's mostly about me and what I can get out of life, okay? So that's our natural bent. Societies are forced to make laws in an attempt to keep this natural bent under control, right? You know what I mean? Laws about, it's a law you have to love people. It's a law you have to be kind because you're so, it's a law you got to be generous. You know, this is very interesting. There's laws about certain things. Because if laws aren't made, people will destroy one another in pursuit of their own agendas. Government institute programs to care for the hurting and to care for the needy and to care for the under-resourced. One of the reasons there are taxes, even in our nation, that's because if there's not laws about this, people get forgotten and trampled and stampeded, and everybody's chased for self-promotion for doing their own things. So get this phrase. I want you to see this phrase on the screen. Kindness and goodness and generosity has to be legislated because it is foreign to the human heart. You get that? I mean, we know this is true. You never really quite saw it like that. Kindness and goodness and generosity has to be legislated. That's why we have laws against not killing, laws against not abusing, laws against having to do this or not having to do that. It's because it's contrary and it's foreign to the human heart, so we've got to legislate these kind of things. But get this. This is not foreign to God. That isn't foreign to God. That's who he is. That's what he's like. So when he established a people who were to represent his reality to the other nations, a people who were to be the conduit of his goodness and blessing and grace to the world, the nation of Israel, that a year ago we talked more about this in our study about the story of God, he gave these people a code of conduct that reflected who he was. They weren't just some abstract rules. They became known as the law of Moses. Some of that got all summed up in the 10 Commandments, but there's a lot more than the 10 Commandments. These are not just rules, but they're a declaration of the heart and the ways of God, that God is crazy in love with people. He's crazy in love with all of them. And he wants them to be honored. He wants them to be protected. He wants them to be secured. He wants them to be cared for. All people. He loves every single one of them. The names that we don't know, he knows them. He knows what they're going through right this second, and he cares. So in the Old Testament, if a person violated another person by taking what didn't belong to him, they were not only to give back what they'd taken, but they were to add more to it. I just want to read, sometimes you go, the Old Testament's so hard to read. I grant you there's some things in the Old Testament law that are hard, but as you skim through some things, let me just read this to you and see if you get it. Okay? It comes out of a book that some of you have never even looked at. It's called Leviticus. Okay? It's of the first 5 books of the Law of Moses, sometimes called the Torah. Let's just read it, starting in Leviticus chapter 6 and verse 2. Here's what it says. It's going to take a couple slides, but hang with me here. When a person sins and acts unfaithfully against the Lord and deceives his companion in regard to a deposit or a security entrusted to him, or through robbery, or if he has extorted them from his companion, or has found what was lost and lied about it and sworn falsely, Then it shall be, when he sins and becomes guilty, that he shall restore what he took by robbery, or what he got by extortion, or the deposit which was entrusted to him, or the lost thing which he found, or anything about which he swore falsely. He shall make restitution of it in full, and add to it 1/5 more. Wouldn't that be a great law in this country? Now, you wonder, why is this recorded in here? I'm just using this as an example. Jesus wasn't interested in just keeping things even. He was about going beyond and blessing people. He was about not taking advantage of people. It wasn't just, let's break it even. It's very interesting. In the courts today, so many times when you're caught for something, you get sent to jail. So a person gets something stolen from them, and they don't get their stolen property back, so the government puts them in jail, and this person who got something stolen, his tax dollars have to pay for this guy's incarceration. That guy's getting a double whammy. He's getting taken advantage of. This was not the biblical way. I mean this very serious. This was not the biblical way. The biblical way was that if somebody took something from you, they had to pay it back with 20% more. And if they couldn't do that, they actually were to give their time, and they were to serve that other person, kind of like an indentured servant, until they paid it off. Great way. It wasn't up to the taxpayers to pay for it. It wasn't up to the government to take care of them. You got it right. Okay? This is the heart of God. The heart of God was that people be made whole. People be made right. All right. That's why we could go through so much of this, but that's why when people were harvesting, in the Old Testament, they had land and they harvested their grain. They weren't to harvest it all the way to the edges. They were supposed to leave stuff all the way around the edges for the people that were poor, for the people that needed help. They had to go out there, and we're going to give you a road service or door service. You had to come out and pick it. You had to go out and do it. Put out some effort, but we're going to make it available to you. God is not a scorekeeper trying to keep everything even, but he's the consummate giver who wants to go way beyond, and he wants to bless people. This is the heart of God. He wants to bless people. He wants them to be in good shape. And here's the thing. Those who are truly in a right relationship with God think the same way, which is not natural, it's supernatural. Please get that. This is why it's such an indicator that the reality of God has invaded a person's life. You don't need the reality of God to read the Bible. You don't need the reality of God to go to a small group. You don't need the reality of God to go to a church. But I'm going to tell you, you really need the power of God in your life to turn somebody from a taker to a giver. That's supernatural. Why Jesus could say, salvation's come to this house, by golly. Or maybe he said by God, because he's God. You know, I don't know. But he said salvation has come to this house. This supernatural response to human need is what brought Jesus down to this earth. It's what caused him to endure being inconvenienced, to be misunderstood, to be abused, and to ultimately be crucified. That was supernatural to somebody to put up with any of that kind of stuff in their life for the good of another person. It says it in John 3:16, a verse that most of us know. John 3:16 simply says this: for God so loved the world. What did he do when he loved? He gave. The consummate giver. That's what the heart of God is all about, being a giver. He gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life. The thought of anybody perishing, the thought of anybody being apart from him for all of eternity, even in this life right now, was just unconscionable to him. He couldn't stand the thought of that. So he had to fix that. God so loved the world that he gave. Now Zacchaeus, being Jewish, he'd grown up with an understanding of the Old Testament. He'd grown up with the understanding of the ways of God. But greed had slipped its slippery little tentacles all around his heart. And at this point in his life, he was so far from God. He was so lost. He was so absolutely disconnected. But when he meets Jesus face to face, when he begins to see the love and the compassion and the grace like he's never even experienced, something happens. And it's not just an outside exercise that happens. Something happens deep in his soul, and it becomes the defining moment for him. As here's what he's thinking. Here's what he's thinking. Will I just enjoy Jesus' company and teaching and continue as a greedy taker? Or will I break free from the bondage of greed and become a true follower of him as a radical giver? That's his defining moment. He could have just said, good lunch, thanks, appreciated all that, have a good day, and gone right back to his ways. I know a lot of people that do that. Make some little prayer of commitment, go to a church, but really their ways aren't even affected. Zacchaeus could have been that kind of person, but he wasn't. This was a defining moment. Am I just going to enjoy Jesus' company? Am I just going to say, nice teaching, and just keep up with my own little greedy taking ways? Or am I actually going to get freed from this in my life, from this greed? And am I going to become a real follower of him and be like him and become a radical giver? And verse 8 makes it very clear that he chooses the latter because immediately he begins to see people differently. Let's read it again. Zacchaeus stopped and said to the Lord, behold, Lord, half of my possessions I'll give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'll give back 4 times as much. Now, you need to catch something here. This was, his view toward people had changed. What he was going to do is use his resources for people. Basically, he began to see people a little bit different. So the first thing he wants to do is use his resources to engage in what Jesus loves. I'm going to help people in their need. By gosh, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to help out some of these people that Jesus cares about. I'm going to help them out with food, and I'm going to help them out with water, and I'm going to help them out with medical attention. I'm going to help them get their feet on the ground if their feet's been knocked out from under them, because that's what Jesus did. And now I'm going to follow him. So you know what? I'm going to do just like Jesus. Good teacher. I'm going to do just like Jesus did. Not because I have to, not because it's being legislated, but because I want to, because I've been freed. That's life change. Now, I love the second thing he says here. If he's cheated or wronged anyone in his dealings, he's going to give back 4 times as much. Now, you remember what the law required? 20%. He goes, 20%? It's nothing. I'm giving back 400%. Changed heart? Changed life? The lost found? Salvation come to that house? Why did he do this? Because the Jesus who he's now following is a radical giver. So he's going to be too. And when Jesus hears this, he says, it's so obvious that this man has experienced true life change. Not because he signed on to attend church or sing some songs, raise his hand, read the Bible. Those are all good things. But because the natural bent of his heart has changed from being a greedy taker to a radical giver. And that can only happen when the Spirit of God invades a life. It's the only way that happens. Now, as I was going through something, and somebody might be thinking, "Ooh, wow, is that what it means to be a Christian? I mean, I got to start signing checks, and I got to hand over, my bank account, and because if that's what it is, I'm not sure I'm there. I'm really not sure I can do that." So let me say something to you, just as honestly and as clearly and as sincerely as I can. It's not that you have to. It's that for the first time, you get to. Because the power of greed gets broken in your life. That's a wonderful way to think. Most people who are controlled by this insatiable quest for more, in fact, some of you right here in this room could be in this category, who have little interest in using how God's blessed you to help others, the people that God's love, using your resources, just all about you. The majority of those people, honestly, are not happy people. I think we know that. They usually don't let anybody know that. They got to keep up a very good appearance. But at their core, something is gnawing. There's just a hole there. There's an emptiness. Zacchaeus was in that category. I think we know that probably the happiest people in the world are givers. I think you know that. Happiest people in the world are givers. And the people that you look up to and the people that you respect most are not takers, but they're givers. Oh, this company, the boss does this. He gets a new boat and he gets a new car and I'm still down here and I don't have extra money. He's a taker. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with business. He can have every right to that. But you know when your attitude changes is when he takes some of that and gives it to you, now he's the greatest guy in the block. Why? Because you love givers. Is that you? You love givers. We all do. We all know this deep down inside of us. Now, if you find this giving thing and generosity thing hard, can I just suggest a couple possible reasons? I don't know, okay? Because I'm just kind of shooting this out like a shotgun over the top of you, so if anything's there, grab a hold of it. First, you just really don't have a relationship with Jesus. You don't. You're just not there. You're not there yet in your life. You may enjoy sitting around the table. You may enjoy listening to what he says. But the reality of his saving and his freeing power has never really invaded your heart. And you may have religion, but you've never actually crossed that line of faith. You just never have. And I'd love for you to do that. Not because there's anything in it for me. I don't get a bonus if you do. Okay? There's just nothing there. But I just look at your life and I go, get freed. Get freed. And that starts with you just crossing that line of faith and saying, Jesus, I know I just held on so tight to me. I'm so scared. But God, I realize that I have violated who you are, and I know that I'm not perfect, and I need your help. Just come into my life and forgive me. I want to be Zacchaeus. I want to start walking and enjoying life just like he did. There's a second reason. Some of you may have been very, very generous givers at one time, but as time went on, you've allowed the influence around you, the influence of more that is everywhere to creep in your soul, whether it's from film or from television or from magazine or from billboards or trying to keep up with friends. And even though you know better, it's squeezing the life right out of you, and you've lost perspective, and you know it. If you have to talk about the former days were better than today, you're not in a good spot. Today ought to always be the best day of your life. Not because it's a nice little phrase, but because you're experiencing the reality of God right now. So this ought to just be absolutely the best day, but you're missing out on that. And you've turned into this tight-fisted, hoarding miser. Even though you really do have enough, you find yourself controlled by the quest for more. Or it could just flat be fear, that you really don't think that God has your back, that you really don't think that God will take care of you. And so you live in this world of what ifs, and there's always something, well, if I give this money, what if? And let me tell you, there's a lot of what ifs out there. That God says, trust me in this one, I got your back. I'll deal with the what ifs when they come. It's part of being involved in a relationship with me. So as we close, can I just say this? I don't think any of us ever fully sheds the mantle of greed that is so deeply rooted in our soul. I like to say that it's gone for me. It's not. This is a kind of defining moment of moving from being a greedy taker to a radical giver that needs to be revisited again and again and again and again. It may have a starting point. Some of us may have done that, but then we come back, and then so we got to do it again, and you come back like stretching a rubber band. It stretches out a little bit more every time, but a lot of times it comes back, And so I know this is true, and I also know that it's only being in the presence of Jesus that ever gives us the right perspective. Listening to him, just being reminded of his incredible grace, of his incredible love, his incredible generosity toward us and what he's done for us. Being reminded that he's blessed and he's resourced us, not just for our own benefit, although it's fine to use it for our own benefit, but so that God can use us as his delivery system to reach out to all the people he wants to touch that takes resources to be able to do. It's interesting. God tells his people to tithe. Now hang with, don't lose me here, okay? God, there's that word again. God tells his people to tithe, which, by the way, means 10% of their income to the local church, because the church is his means of bringing his life-changing grace and reality to the community and the world way beyond any one of us can do individually. You pull those resources, you're able to do some incredible things in a city. That's why he says to do it. And can I just say, this almost bothers me would be too strong. This bothers me. Did I say bother? 10% is not the ceiling, it's the ground floor. It's like if you're talking to Zacchaeus would say, 10%? I'm giving 4 times that. Gee, if that's what I'm required to do, or that's what I'm asked to do, why am I going to try to go to the bottom shelf? I mean, who wants to be bottom shelf people? I don't want to be, just live at the bottom of the lake, be a bottom feeder. I'm going to go up. I'm going to go 400%. Why not? Why not? Why not? We need to get this. This is what Jesus is saying. God told his people to use his resources to do good and to bless those in need, to stand in the gap for the hurting and the under-resourced and the poor that he loves. That's just who God is. Which is why, and I want you to get this statement again. Look at it on the screen. Which is why being a giver is the greatest evidence that the reality of God has invaded your life. Greatest evidence. So how you doing on this one? Should have slept in, huh? Some of you are doing great on this. Last week, as we were making the deposit, which I don't do that, but I see it, into the bank from the giving, there was a kind of a large check there. I'm not telling you who it is because I don't think they'd feel comfortable in being known. So I said to the person who's making the deposit, who's this one's from? And they told me, and I said, that's wonderful. How come? Said, because they said they got their bonus this month. But wow. I get chills just saying that. There's somebody who gets it. Did God give me a bonus so I could go out and do more stuff? Sure, that's fine. Absolutely fine. Do we ever think that maybe God gave me a bonus so I can use it, like Zacchaeus did, to touch people that God loves and to make a difference? Some of you used to be this way, but not anymore. And some of you are just a long way off on that. So Ben, why don't you come up here? I want to give you the opportunity this morning, and this is in your court, okay? I'm not in the conversation at all here. I want to give you an opportunity to have a defining moment right now. This is between you and God. I want you to think about what we've been talking about here. And if you're doing great, just say, God, how can I do greater? I don't want to just do great. I want to do greater. If I'm doing greater, I want to do even greater more, God. How can you use me in this? And some of you may need to say to God, God, I'm just downright scared. I'm just downright scared. I used to do this all the time when I had a bunch of money, but now, man, the resources are a lot less. I'm getting kind of scared here. And God, I don't know if your promises actually work when my income's been cut a little bit. It's like God's going, really? You really think my promises are dependent on kind of your boss? Man, I'm promising you some stuff. So would you do that? I'm going to pray here, and I'm just going to give you a minute. You deal with God on this. You tell him your fears. Some of you, by the way, can I tell you what your defining moment ought to be? You ought to take financial peace. You ought to take it. Because if you cannot be generous, you're the number one candidate for financial peace. Because it's about how your money, you can take control of your money instead of it controlling you. And you can begin to engage with God with your money with a smile on your face. And I just encourage you, if you've not done that, and I know we've already passed the connection cards in, but you go to that information table out there and you tell those over at that table, I want to take financial peace, and we'll get a hold of you. This is really critical. This is why we offer this course, to free your life. Not to bind you, but to free you. So I'm going to pray, and then as the band plays, you just spend a minute there, and you just engage with God however you want, and make this a defining moment in your life in this area. God, thank you so much that you laid it out so clearly, Lord. Lord, you're not hard to understand. You're actually too simple sometimes. I wish it was a little more complex. But you're such a radical giver. And when you come into our lives, God, you don't want to just change a few of our habits. You want to change our heart. You want to change the way we view people. You want to change the way we view our resources, God. You want us to link up with you in what you are crazy in love about. And simply say every single time we have any money in our hands, God, you love us. You give us. What do you want me to do with this? I'll gladly go out and buy a new car, God, but I'll also gladly shovel it off someplace else if that's where you direct it. God, I pray that this would be a defining moment right now as people just engage with you, God, and give them the confidence and the courage that they need to make a step like Zacchaeus did and really see for the first time what he had at his disposal, and his miserly ways was just shutting out you from his life. God, we don't want to do that. So you engage with us right now in Jesus' name. Amen.